stories of Ikigai. Are you good at what you do? Do you love what you're doing? Are you serving a need? And do you feel rewarded? In this podcast, you'll hear how others discover their Ikigai with the hope that it'll help you discover yours. Hi, I'm Mika Domingo, and this is Stories of Ikigai. I'm honored to introduce you to our guest, Jonathan Lee. Born in Minnesota, Jonathan Lee lived in 5 states and Canada by the age of 12 due to his parents' acrimonious divorce. That year, the family court approved a custody settlement, and Jonathan lived with his father and stepmother in the Kansas City area until he graduated high school. Jonathan's grandparents, and his grandmother in particular, were key influences in his life, encouraging his interest in history. Jonathan attended college at Washington University in St. Louis and law school at Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C. He met his spouse, Esther, in law school, and they have lived in the Bay Area for 30 years, where they raised 2 daughters. In 2005, Jonathan joined the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco. He continued to practice civil litigation, representing the United States in personal injury, employment, and civil rights cases. More recently, in 2018, Jonathan requested a new assignment in the criminal division, prosecuting a wide variety of crimes, including child exploitation, human trafficking, fraud, firearms, drugs, and other violent crimes. Jonathan has tried criminal and civil cases as an AUSA. Jonathan enjoys being active in his community. He volunteered to help teach life skills classes at Juvenile Hall, served as a volunteer coach, umpire, referee, and administrator for local girls softball and soccer leagues, and also volunteers as a mediator for the federal and state courts. Jonathan teaches skills classes such as trial practice or negotiations at 3 area law schools, including UC-Berkeley, UC Hastings, and JFK, and he enjoys keeping in touch with students and encouraging their professional development. Welcome to the show, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm fine, Mika. Thank you for having me. It's really wonderful to be here.
How did your grandparents, your grandmother in particular, help shape who you are today?
Oh, that's easy. That's my grandparents on my mom's side were just so instrumental by their expressions of love and support and encouragement to me when I was younger. You mentioned in the intro that I had moved around a lot due to my parents' divorce before I was 12, and it really was kind of an unhealthy environment for children, both my siblings, all of my siblings, and myself. And my mom's parents were a real source of strength for us. And my grandmother in particular, she was someone who had the ability to just observe you and understand your potential and see an interest that you have and then provide encouragement for you. So as an example, she saw that I was someone who was interested in history. I learned about American history, and I was really interested in learning about the presidents. And this is when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And she provided some materials to me, almanacs and encyclopedias and other materials. And it just gave me even more motivation to learn more about it and about that subject. And eventually I wrote in longhand cursive, I wrote this book about the presidents. And I showed it to her during one of my visits. And she took it to her office and she bound that book. And she made mimeographed copies and bound a couple of copies and brought it back to me and said, here, this is for you. And just that simple act really validated my interest, because she was someone who was very busy, had a busy professional life. And so for her to really show that interest in me, it made quite an impression. And we went on and had just a wonderful relationship until she passed. And she just continued to model for me being a lifelong learner, being open to trying new challenges, trying to find your best and highest purpose in life. That was something that she modeled. She is definitely a role model for me, looking at her career and just her life and how she lived it. And so it started with sort of the trauma of childhood, and she stepped in and tried to intervene and help me. And then it just grew from there into a relationship that really became a foundational aspect of my adult life.
That is so wonderful. Did your grandmother encourage you to pursue a career in law?
She encouraged me to find my highest and best use in life. And she modeled that. She and my grandfather both modeled that. I mean, just a little bit more background about them. They were both from the Midwest. She was from Kansas. He was from South Dakota. They got married basically right at the height of the Depression. And they were supposed to stay with their families and work on farms or work in local jobs and make money to make ends meet. That was what their families wanted, but they wanted to pursue education. So they went to college. They both had careers as educators, and they were partners in that effort, as well as their marriage, something else that I've tried to incorporate in my life. So they were educators, they were school teachers, principals, professors, and then curriculum developers. So she, in her mid-40s, got her master's, and at age 62 got her PhD. And so those are just representative incidents in her life that show that she was a lifelong learner and was always trying to find her highest and best use and purpose. And that's what she instilled in me. It could have been law, it could have been something else. But she saw that my interest was in history, which fed, nicely into an interest in law over time. And so she encouraged me in what I was showing as an interest already.
She was such an inspiration. And your first job as an attorney was as a litigation associate for a firm. And then you served as a deputy city attorney for the city attorney's office in San Francisco. And since 2005, you have worked as a U.S. attorney for the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco, previously in civil and now in criminal division. Can you walk us through your path and talk about when and how you knew that what you're doing now is what you wanted to do?
Sure. It was a slow process for me. One of the things I tell my students is, it may take a couple of moves in the career before you even begin to have an idea. I mean, maybe you'll know right away, but if you're anything like me, it might take a while. I think I would go back to, you mentioned that at age 12, there was a family court order that really settled custody in my parents' divorce. And that brought a lot of stability to my life where there hadn't been any before, and gave me an opportunity to even think about having an education where there really wasn't that kind of opportunity before. And so although that decision was not one that I liked at the time, because I had been conditioned to think a certain way, mm-hmm. Over time, I saw that really changed the trajectory of my life. And it was because, a family court made a decision in my best interest. And there was a judge who made a decision. There were lawyers who advocated on their sides. I'm really grateful to all of them. And the staff of the court, everyone who touched that file, made a contribution to what to them may have appeared to be a pretty small decision, but in my life was really big, because it opened my mind to the possibility of an education and a career, and seeing what law did for me. I think it was, over time, it became apparent that I had an interest in making those kinds of decisions or being involved with that kind of process for others. So I went to law school. I was really enthusiastic and idealistic about it. And then my first job was, as you mentioned, with a civil law firm in San Francisco, the Hancock firm. And, we did a lot of different forms of civil litigation. It was a really good opportunity for me to get exposure to hands-on responsibility in civil lawsuits. Within my first year of practice, I was taking depositions, defending depositions, making motion arguments, writing motions, just doing basically everything in civil cases with some supervision, of course, but I was allowed to really dig in and get hands-on responsibility. And then that kind of fueled my fire to get closer to the trial process and to be in the courtroom trying cases. And I had an opportunity to go to the city attorney's office in San Francisco, which is a wonderful office, municipal law office, does great work. And I was so honored to take that job and really began to try cases. I think the first year I was there, I had 4 jury trials. And, in that office, you try a lot of cases, a lot of personal injury cases and some civil rights cases as you go along. And so getting in the courtroom and actually arguing to juries was something that I just really, really wanted to do. I wanted to challenge myself. I didn't think I would be very good at it, and I didn't think it would be very comfortable, but I thought that it was a good place for me to grow and develop skills. And it was. So from there, when the opportunity came my way to come to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I jumped at the opportunity, even though I love the city attorney's office and it was hard to leave. I thought that the practice in the U.S. Attorney's Office was one that I just had to dive into. And I was there the first 13 years, as you mentioned. I was in the civil division. So I continued doing civil litigation exclusively until just very recently. But in that role, I did, got more civil trials, had the opportunity to work on employment cases as well as personal injury and civil rights and try cases. And then the other thing about the U.S. Attorney's Office is that you represent the United States in all litigation here in the district for the most part. There are a few cases that are handled out of Washington, D.C., but for the most part. And the United States has far-flung operations, diverse and far-flung operations. And so you work on a lot of different kinds of things can come in the door in the civil division. One case that really stands out for me, I'm just glad that I had the chance to work on it, was basically an administrative action by a local business. It was a gun shop in the East Bay that had a federal license to sell firearms and related equipment and ammunition. And the government agency had terminated their license for poor record keeping practices. And so they brought an action to challenge that. And it was a bigger case in scope and involved many years of activity at that gun shop, lots of records, motion practice. But it boiled down to, should this business lose its license permanently? And should all the guns that they have in their inventory leave this area and go somewhere else to a different licensee that would sell them? And I really enjoyed the issues, the intellectual challenge of that case and the effect that it would have on the community as I perceived it. And it was I just felt a privilege to work on that case, and we were able to prevail. And that gun shop, lost its license and went out of business. Or went out of the firearms business. I think they maintain a sporting goods business on the side. So that kind of brings us up to more recent times when I switched to the criminal division in 2018.
Why did you ask to move from civil to criminal?
I really reached a point where I felt that I needed to ask for a new challenge. This was, I'd been in the civil division for a number of years. I had done civil litigation for over 25 years. And I just thought, I should really challenge myself in this new way. It does kind of bring me back to my grandmother, who got her PhD at age 62. I think she really showed us that, you can grow and develop in meaningful and significant ways at any age. And I feel like I just followed in her footsteps in some respects. But it was, there are important issues in criminal cases, and I wanted the opportunity to learn about them and to grapple with them and to have the experience of working on them, trying to achieve another expression of justice. in our office, moving from civil to criminal.
Were there any challenges that you faced as you switched from civil to criminal?
Well, yes. I mean, it was, I started over, really started with the basics because I didn't know much, basically didn't know anything. And I didn't want to, I wanted to learn from the ground up. So I went back to the line. In our office, that's an expression for the AUSAs who are in court. They're not supervisors. I had been a supervisor in the civil division, but I moved back to the line and kind of started over from the ground up in a unit where, you know, new people hired into the office start out to learn the ropes. So that was a good challenge because I was able to just kind of take the plunge. I devoted a lot of extra time, you know, nights, evenings and nights, and some weekends just to try to catch up, just to try to do additional reading, and that cut into important family time here and there. So those were some challenges. Those are the biggest challenges.
Can you talk about maybe one or two cases, just in general, that really made you feel that you're doing something that contributes to the world?
Sure. I think it's probably, the way I think of it is there are categories of cases. That's the first thought that comes to mind. There are a number of different kinds of cases that we work on, but there are some that I think provide that sense or that feeling and that extra motivation for me. Cases like sex trafficking, labor trafficking, exploitation of children online, investment fraud, where you have vulnerable victims. Any case where someone has been victimized because of their vulnerability. There's someone who maybe feels that they've been left out or left behind, or they don't trust the system, or their language or other cultural barriers that stand in the way of their being able to navigate these situations, and so they end up a victim. Where there's that element of vulnerability to the victim, I do feel like the work that I'm doing is especially important because, you know, I haven't been in any of those specific situations like child exploitation, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, or investment fraud. But from my early years, I recall the feeling of being kind of on the margin of your community. We moved so much that we were unsettled, and you're not as visible in your community when you're not known, when you're the new person all the time. And, you know, there were things that happened in our family that shouldn't have happened. And, you know, there were some adults who intervened out of acts of kindness at different times, but I certainly have a sense from my own experience of what it can feel like to wonder if anybody would notice what has happened to you. And I've had in my cases, getting back to my cases, I've had the experience where a victim would say, you know, I'm deeply grateful for the work that you did on this case because I really thought that no one would ever care. I'm thinking of, in particular, maybe the sex trafficking victims, where you're talking about most often a younger woman or a teenage girl who is exploited and wonders if anyone will ever do anything about it. So when I have the opportunity to work on those kinds of cases, I feel quite a bit of professional fulfillment just for giving the effort, just to get to the bottom of it. Means a lot.
And clearly your work makes such an impact on other people's lives. And you are also, without doubt, committed to serving your community. You're also a professor and you continue to do a lot of volunteer work. What drives you to do what you do?
I feel that there are two things that I would say about that. One is, to the extent that I am always trying to improve myself, grow and develop, and reach my highest and best use, I'm giving some meaning to things that I went through earlier in my life. And so I think it's just it's again, it was what was modeled for me. And it's what I've sort of taken as something that I want to have animate my life. And I think that there were many times when people helped me along the way. I can think of different adults who were outside of our family who, through acts of kindness, did something that helped me. Certainly family members, my grandmother and others. And so, it brings to mind a quick, do we have time for a quick story about that?
Oh, absolutely. Please share.
So you mentioned that we lived in Canada.
Yes.
We lived there we got there when I just turned 9, and we got there in December. It's Southern Ontario. It's winter. We were living in a lakeside hotel that was abandoned for the season. Turns out that we were squatting in a hotel, didn't have any heat, on the North Shore of Lake Erie. And we got there right before Christmas, and my siblings and I, we were under orders to not leave the house because we were trying to avoid being found by my other parent. So it was not a very happy time because we didn't have much of anything. We certainly were left unsupervised, and it was not a good situation. A neighbor came over and invited us to their house, and when we got there, they had gifts for us. It was right around Christmas. I think it was right after Christmas when they gave us those gifts. So that was 1975. I think it was 1974 when that happened. That December. Well, we moved away and we came back to the States. And then as you said, I went back to Kansas City. I went to high school. I went to college. I went to law school. Got married. Had a family. With my family, we were traveling up in that area. We were in Michigan, and we were doing a car trip back to Pennsylvania.
Was this recently?
This was about 2005.
I see.
So it was about 15 years ago. So it was a family vacation in the summertime. And I asked Esther, can we just drive through Southern Ontario? Because I'd really like to see that little village where we lived. Haven't been there since. And we went there, and we found the hotel, which was now a retirement living center, residential living center for retirees. And then I went to the house of the neighbors, knocked on the door, and they didn't live there anymore, but the people that did live there told us where they lived. And so it was just across town. So we drove over there. We walked up to the front door. It was, me and my family, and knocked on the door. And the husband and wife, their names were Ed and Joanne, they answered the door. And I said, you probably don't remember me. And I know it's been a long time. It's been almost 30 years. But I wanted to just come back. I felt it was important to say thank you for all the kindness that you showed to me and to my siblings. And they, within a few seconds, they said, "Oh, you're Jonathan." And they remembered my sisters and my brother. Yeah.
Wow.
And they had, then they hustled around. They had some stuffed animal gifts that they gave to my kids,
Wow.
And we had a conversation about, and they were able to give me some additional information about the parent that I was there with, that we were living with. And it was interesting, because they filled in some of the gaps for me from their perspective of what was happening.
Right.
But, I mention it because that having that opportunity to give someone an expression of gratitude many years delayed is something that I put a lot of value on that experience. I thought that was a That was an experience that shaped me as a person, to be able to just express that to them. They gave me something when I was a child, and I was able to give it back to them. That's the way I look at it. And so you ask about teaching and, the work that I do in the community. I feel like all of those go into the same category. I have been very fortunate to have had folks that have helped me along the way, both in the family and outside the family. And I want to be that for other people. It's usually those that are younger or less experienced. I seem to particularly find those avenues to express that. And it's really been a deeply meaningful thing for me to be able to do, teaching law students, for example, or coaching girls in softball and soccer, or working at juvenile hall. I feel like they give me so much by allowing me to work with them. It is a valuable and life completing activity for me.
What a wonderful story about going back to the family in Canada. Must have been a wonderful gift for them to see you 30 years after they invited you over for Christmas, gave you gifts, and maybe even provided some guidance as a young child, as a young person. And for them to hear about what you're doing now and how you're paying it forward, and how much of a mentor you are to a lot of your students, and just a wonderful person in the community. It's just really inspiring to hear about your story, and how you look at you feeling very grateful for the life that you've lived, and you continue to contribute. And I don't know how many semesters you've been teaching, but it's a lot, maybe even 40 or more.
I don't think it's that much. I think it's somewhere around just over 30, but it's something that I really, really enjoy. I just got a call this week from a student, one of my Hastings students from 5 years ago, who contacted me last year. Her name is Carla, and she wanted a job with a federal agency, not my agency, a different agency. And she wanted to kind of brainstorm with me. It ended up, we talked about it. I ended up writing a letter for her and making some phone calls to be a reference. And she didn't get the job last year, but she called me this week to let me know that she did get the job. And it's a wonderful feeling to be able to play some role, however small, in, backing folks as they try to figure out what they want to do in this profession. And she's going to do work in the public sector. It's going to be very, very significant in the community around labor issues. And she has a deep interest in that from her own personal story. So when I meet these law students and I hear their stories, first of all, many times they're brilliant. They have great ideas, they have great insights, and I learn from them. But it's also inspiring to hear them as they describe, what they've been through, what they've overcome, and what they want to do. I draw inspiration from them as well. We talk a lot in my class about, finding a path that really gives you some sense of fulfillment, at least some of the time. And you may have to do some trial and error to find it, but I think it's so important in this profession that people have that in mind. And so I give them a somewhat hokey little test that they can give to themselves from time to time that I dubbed the pillow test.
Oh,
I don't know if you've heard of that.
what is that?
Well, the pillow test, as I understand it, is there's two parts to it. When you go to sleep at night and you lay your head down on the pillow, do you feel Do you feel good about what you did? Do you feel like you worked on something that is meaningful to you, deeply meaningful? And you have a sense of satisfaction about that. That's part one. Part two, when it's time to get up in the morning and go to work, do you get off your pillow with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of excitement about what you're going to go do in your job? And so I encourage the students to use that test or come up with one of their own that helps them from time to time touch base and evaluate where they are. And just to even be asking those questions is so important. If you're asking those questions of yourself from time to time, you're much more likely to actually make intentional choices that will lead you to a sense of professional fulfillment. Again, we're talking about at least some of the time. I mean, we all understand this is a tough profession and there are a lot of different things that people do. So I'm not trying to paint a rosy scenario where everything is always wonderful. I'm just saying, ask yourself those questions. Try to come up with answers that will be meaningful to you at least some of the time.
I like the pillow test. And I agree. There'll be times when, you may have a challenging day. And so maybe you're reluctant to get up, but, it's something that you can at least reflect on. And it's not just one question, in the morning, but it's the question before you go to bed that also gives you some time to reflect.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything you want to share to our listeners about how you discovered your true purpose and any other words of wisdom?
I think the only other piece that comes to mind, I think we've covered a lot of it, but I think people, obviously you want to be proficient and you want to have expertise in an area. People feel comfortable when they know that they have expertise, and there's something really important about that. I also think that there's a value, that we have a value in our professional lives when we seek out challenges, new experiences that are not as comfortable. I think that's, where you can make mistakes or make attempts that don't go as planned. And I think there's a lot of growth, personal growth and professional growth and development that is available to people that pursue that as just part of the mix of their work life. So at least I found that to be the case. If I hadn't, I think it was when I decided to put myself into a new situation and to get comfortable with being uncomfortable so that I could learn about this new situation. Those are the times that I felt the greatest growth and development as a person and as a lawyer over time. And so I think for me, that's a piece of advice that I would share for folks to at least consider it.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's really been an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to talk to you. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you for listening. Stories of Ikigai is brought to you by MS Domingo Law Group.